everybody. Wow, I said hi everybody. That's new.
I know, and I said, well, hi. All right. Hello.
Hi guys.
Time for another
What we read.
Yes.
We are reading quite a lot.
Thankfully, like it's a thing. I mean, I think it's the end of the year, and you sort of kind of pick up your stride. And I was going through like a bad reading slump, but then suddenly things presented themselves that were
compelling.
Some of them easier to read, some of them not. We'll talk about the easier to read ones maybe in the next video. But for now, for me personally, these were hard to get through, and some of you will not be surprised.
Or maybe you will.
Or maybe you will.
Who
You
knows?
never know.
But I guess I'm going to kick things off because
Yes,
I have a
please.
couple of other books to talk about before we get to that. The first book is actually a book that if Mackie is frustrated by the books he's going to be talking about, this book actually had the same effect on me when I was reading it. The book in question is The Gracier by Kim Liggett. It's coming out from Wednesday Books. I think it's an October release date now. Anyway, The Gracier was being pitched as something that was very similar to The Handmaid's Tale. In the story, the village that the girls are from, they send the girls out for a year called The Gracier. They're supposed to survive on their own, purge themselves basically of the natural magic that they're given, and then come back and assume their proper roles in society, whether that's as a wife, as a laborer, whatever the case. In the story, Tierney, the main character, is going to be experiencing her Gracier. And for her, all she wants is to survive the Gracier, to just make it through, and then get assigned to be like a laborer. She prefers to be like either a farmer or like someone who could work with her hands and do whatever she wants, because she doesn't want to conform to the idea of being a wife, a dutiful, obedient wife, basically. Which is all well and good. They finally get to where they're going to be staying for the entirety of their Gracier. It's like this village, not a village even, it's like a little residential island. Tierney she still has the will to try and help everyone survive the Gracier, and the other girls don't want to listen to her because the girl who got jilted, takes the lead over everything and convinces the other girls that they need to embrace all their magic and that they have to do it so that they can get rid of it, and then, you know, everything will be okay for them again. And she's like, we have to do this way. And eventually it comes to the point where Tierney gets kicked out of the village and must fend for herself. There's a lot going on in this story. It's interesting to see how the author explores the idea of, you know, males being afraid of this feminine power, but yet wanting to have it for themselves. And it also explores the idea of how the dynamics between different females is also very complicated sometimes, because some of them want to embrace being docile and obedient because that's the way they've always known it and that's the safe way for them, and the others are like, no, hell no, I do not want that. The reason why this book is so frustrating to me is because for the first third of it, I was very interested, very intrigued. I can't say I enjoyed it because it's a very difficult position to find themselves in. Like, they're being sent out of the village to survive on their own for an entire year with this X amount of supplies, just each other for company, and no idea about what's going to happen or where they're even going for this Gracier. Like, there's no way to prepare for it. It's like this very interesting mix of things, but then it devolves into something where I was like, I don't know that I would have I like the plot going in that direction. I think Tierney would have been such an interesting character to follow, but her outlook on their situation, her perspective, kind of shifts. Like, she still is focused on surviving the year and getting the other girls to survive the year too, but something happens to her where she kind of has an ideology shift, I guess I want to say, and it really bothered me because it sort of felt to me like it invalidated who she was at the start of the book. And I'm not saying that characters can't change, but it just felt like because the story was so much about that part of her, who she was, and then it suddenly shifted violently into something else, I was a little bit thrown off by that, and so it frustrated me. This is not to say that there isn't something to be taken away from the story, because like I said, it does explore certain themes that I think are interesting. And even though Tierney kind of experiences the character shift, there's still an underlying part of her that recognizes now in other people that there is a way to be rebellious without outright rebellion. This is a weird thing for me to say, but that's how it feels.
Yeah, and so there's a subversion of the...
Yeah, I feel like I was expecting it to go somewhere and it didn't quite go. Like, I feel like we took a detour somewhere else and I was like, not quite what I was looking for. So I think a lot of people will find it interesting to read this story and see the different elements of it, especially if you like stories like The Handmaid's Tale, where
where
once again females are being
subversions and tropes that are just flipped on its head. And
I mean, if that's your cup of tea, I would suggest picking this up. It's not personally
misogynistic dystopian.
Yeah, it's not something
future,
personally that I ended up really enjoying. So
doesn't sound like a go-to, does it?
No, take it off. Take that as you will.
Yeah, fair.
I also completed a series last month. I finally listened. I didn't even read. I listened to Undying, which is by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner, this is the follow-up and conclusion to the duology that begins with Unearthed. So whereas Unearthed is Indiana Jones in space, this one is more like, spoiler if you haven't read the first book, it's like an alien invasion on Earth. So think like Animorphs or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, stuff like that. I think because I listened to it on audio, it was much more enjoyable than it would have been otherwise. I feel like if I was trying to read it, I would have been like, why didn't you guys just make this one book? Because it could have totally been one book split into 2 parts. Because that's how it felt. It was a good idea for me to actually go back and revisit Unearthed and then go into this one, because I felt like I got the full experience, if you will. Yeah. I do like that in this story, it's not just about the aliens invading Earth and what they can do to stop that. It also explores sort of what Jules and Mia feel like they should be doing in the face of that. They're 2 teenagers, and they're the ones who know that this is happening, and like, do they take responsibility for that, or do they leave it to the adults? So that's an interesting thing. I also like that they explored sort of their relationship dynamic in the context of this, although there was at some point I was like, guys, we don't have time for this. We need to, like, there's aliens coming, come on. I do think that the explanation of the Undying race and like what it was, what they were, how they planned to invade Earth was very interesting. The conclusion worked out pretty well too, because I was like, I don't know where this is going, but I guess it's going somewhere. I do not love this one as much as Unearthed. I think I just in general prefer the Indiana Jones vibe of that previous story. But it was definitely worth reading just to get to the conclusion and to see what happens to Jules and Mia and the people they care about, and to sort of get to know and care for some new characters as well. So if you are going to read this series, I would highly suggest binging them back to back. I feel like that's a more effective all-around experience. I also highly recommend the audiobooks because the narrators do such an incredible job with Mia and Jules, and I just feel like they bring the story to life in a way that really engaged me, and I'm pretty sure that's gonna hold true for most science fiction at this point. So definitely check it out if it sounds interesting to you. So the last book I'm gonna talk about, I also actually listened to audiobook, and I have to say, like, even though I'm not the target audience for these books, and even though I'm reading them like as an adult and not as like someone younger, I have to say it was really fun. I read or listened to the first Artemis Fowl book. It's an experience.
It is. It's an oldie but goodie, and the fact that it's making a resurgence now,
yeah,
I feel like it was kind of ahead of its time back in its day, if you think about it, right?
I think so too, because I like that it's not super dated, and it
no, not at all.
And I like that the character tropes are still the kind that you can latch onto and be like, of course I'll be interested in this story.
Yeah, and the
plot is, again, it's not
first of all, it's middle grade, right? Yeah. And it's pretty simple, and okay. So let's talk about it.
Okay, let's do what is the plot breakdown of Artemis Fowl?
For those of you young folk who are watching, youngins who are watching this, that were not youngins back when this came out, and I wasn't too young either. I was no spring chicken by the time that this was out. It's a story about
Artemis Fowl,
who is a boy genius,
12-year-old boy genius,
super rich, very Irish, I want to say, and has many great schemes.
One of which includes capturing a fairy and holding the fairy for ransom in order to get some gold.
That's right.
Because, you know, that's the way to get rich, apparently. The other character in the story is a fairy named Holly, and she works for the Leprechaun unit.
Right.
Which basically covers up any incidents involving fairies or any of the fair folk in the human world.
And LEP stands for Lower Elements Police.
So great.
And reconnaissance. Lower Elements Police reconnaissance, etc. So Leprechaun
Isn't it great?
Unit.
I have to say, like, it is the most ridiculous thing, because obviously, first of all, it's fine because you're setting in the world of fairies. Come on, of course it's going to be ridiculous. But like the sheer shenanigans that everyone gets up to in this, I'm just like, who would have thought of this stuff?
Right, but in fact, one might even say that what this does for like fairy lore is almost kind of like a subverted trope of what Rick Riordan does for Greek mythology. Like Rick Riordan sets up like a relatable young hero who gets sucked into this world. Not happening here. This young hero is kind of a jerk.
He's a
complete prat. And he doesn't so much get sucked into the world as sort of invades it and begins to sort of like corrupt it for his own purposes. It's literally the reverse thing that happened with Percy Jackson.
And yet you can't help but admire the fact that he actually is smart enough to figure out how to get his way.
And he's always a step ahead of it. So he's literally an anti-hero.
It's kind of great though.
Playing an anti-villain. It's
like
a weird trope on trope thing. And in hindsight, I mean, I was like, and I met Owen Colfer at Book Expo because I wanted to have a couple of books signed. And I finally got to tell him, you're the only author who has ever made me like fairies. Or reading about fairies, because to this day I still kind of don't. Like, I do, like, there's no, like, rapport.
More on that later.
And there's a lot of self-loathing involved in there. But but more on that later. But this book, it's just so fun. It's fun.
It's really fun. I think the plot in itself is really a good, like, solid story. But what really makes this story for me are the characters, because they're just so fun
and the layers,
ridiculous, but fun.
And the layers to Artemis, I think, is very, very is very, very noteworthy to hear. Where he's not just he's not just like Quentin Quire, I'm a jackass.
There's more there.
There's some motivation there that you realize, I didn't expect it to go there, and then the gleam goes away, and he's back to being a jerk.
And you're like, oh,
and
great, never mind.
And that's literally, I swear to God, this entire thing is Artemis. Like, that's everyone's, like, every character on his side and on the other side is just, what is this? What are we?
Pretty much.
That is summary.
So I actually definitely will continue with the series. I also really enjoyed the audiobook. I wanted to mention that because it was genuinely just fun.
Okay, so before I move on to my segment, Alexa has to talk about this book, because this is the beginning and I am at the current last book out. And are we not surprised at this point in time that this is Keeper of the Lost City? So Lex, do regale the lovely people of BookTube with your account.
So on a whim, one night, I was like, I'm going to start Keeper of the Lost Cities, and this was after Mackie had read it and liked it a lot, and then Kristen had read it and really loved it, so I was like, okay, I want to read it too. Like,
yeah, that Kristen from Super Space Chick actually loved, like, a lot, and she's like, okay, that makes complete sense.
You guys already know probably, but the story is about Sophie Foster, who discovers that there is an entire secret world that she's actually a part of because she's an elf. And so she ends up becoming involved in this world, going to school in this world, and
basically cutting ties with every single like bit of her life in the human world. So a lot of it does not take place.
Yes, most of it takes place in the elven world in this book.
Yeah,
and then uncovering the fact that there is actually a bigger conspiracy, and she still doesn't know the exact details of it, but we know that it's a big deal by the end of the first book. See, here's what happened. I started it, and at first I was like, okay. The beginning has parts that remind me of Percy Jackson and a little bit of Irish Job because it takes place in a museum. And then there's this kid who realizing that somebody else knows the truth about the fact that she's different.
And then the explanation as to why.
But then I also really laughed when, I shouldn't say laughed, because it was an accident, it was terrible. But like there's this moment where her ability sort of gets
away from her, yeah.
And I'm sorry, but the first thing I thought of was like, this reminds me so much of that Twilight moment. And if you read it, you know which moment it is. But anyway, once we got past all of that, and she finally got into the elven world and sort of starts getting ingratiated
pretty sparkly boy is always the key.
We start getting ingratiated into like the world, what it means, like the custom society, all of that. I couldn't stop reading it.
It's fascinating.
I literally read it in one sitting because I was like, I just need to know, okay? I just need to know. Not only do you get the whole magical school, like, here are the different classes you're going to take and things you have to know. And the friendship group, once you get to that part, it was already good. And then you throw in the fact that there's this, like she has like an adoptive family and they have their own thing to resolve. And then you throw in the fact that she's at the heart of this conspiracy that nobody wants to talk about, that she's figuring out because someone is making her aware of it. I'm just like, how do you stop reading? How?
And underpinning all of this, right, is you have at the core of it, like, the magical, like, here's like the machinery under why we love this so much. It's almost kind of like every magical girl story.
Also, I'm so mad that the world is so good in this book. I'm so angry about that.
Oh, you know what? Let's start with that. The world here is so intricately put together, so intelligently,
but it's also so simple.
And so simply, like, laid out.
Yeah.
That you almost, and like any good kind of like world building, it's there, it adds value to the story, but it isn't sort of taking center stage. So it gives you so much like room to play with, and then you add the personal histories and the character dynamic to these folks,
so good.
And it just becomes so compelling. And like any magical girl trope, where you have a young girl who finds herself in possession of these insane abilities that are seemingly the key to moving things forward in the story, and how she's also at the center of everything that the bad guys are trying to do. It's just so great how it all comes together.
It really is. So the world is good, the story is good, the characters are great as well. I really, really like Sophie as a protagonist. I think if I had read this at the same time that I had read Harry Potter, like around that age, I would have loved Sophie just as much as I enjoy Harry.
Well,
just saying, like it would have just been nice to read a very female-centered story instead of a male-centered story.
Very female-centered story, very strong female-centered story, and because while we're on that
before we switch over to Mackie talking, I'm just gonna say, if you want to know which team I happen to be on, it's Team Keith, and there's a very specific reason for that. It's because he's exactly my type. Okay, bye. That's all I got. Clearly, I just love that book.
The kind of snarky one-liner type person who kind of just pokes fun off from the sidelines and tries to play it off as callous.
Who's like, notice me. Notice me.
I have read all the way through to, I want to say, book 7, right? So I've done Lodestar, I've done Nightfall, and then, Flashback, which is the most recent book that sort of came out.
And hardcovers, they're so pretty.
Yeah, they're definitely, Kristen has like all of them already.
I know.
And I read all these, and all the way through, and what has kept me reading is because Sophie does get her shoujo, like, magical girl moments where she's like, I will be the beating heart of this entire group, and be like a source of inspiration and hope for me and my friends. And she does that time and time and again. The only two things that are bogging me down, and let's start with the easier one.
The one that you've talked about before?
The one that that's the harder one. The easier thing to talk about for this without spoiling too much is because we are on the bloody 7th book, and it doesn't, it's like Harry Potter would have ended by now, you know what I mean? Like this entire...
There's just more story to tell.
But there's only so much time left to draw something out. So you're either going to set something magnificently, giantly, conflagratingly awesome ending, or it's just going to be super anticlimactic, and that's where I'm a little bit scared. Like, and it's the kind of scared where I'm kind of confident that the author will really take us through to a great place. In the same way that I was terrified that Joss Whedon was helming the Avengers, because I loved all of his previous work to that, and I thought, is the person behind Firefly and Angel and everything going to do to the Avengers what he's done for all of the fans of his, like, the Whedonverse?
Yeah. And
he did. And then Age of Ultron came out, and I'm just so nervous. I'm like, is he gonna do it? Is he gonna do it again? And so I'm that kind of scared / confident that it's getting there. It's just, it's getting so long drawn out, and the stakes are getting so much higher, and the odds are getting so much like smaller in their favor, and I
just want to know. Actually, I have
and
to
in my head,
up so we can play a prediction.
Right, and in my head, I'm just like, everything sucks now, and the bad guys who have been finally revealed a bit more. I'm like, how are they going to beat these guys now? That's, to me, one of the hardest things, because it was so painful getting through this book. Oddly enough, I read it the quickest because I had to get it on Kindle, because I am not dragging this thing around with me everywhere I go. And that's the second hardest thing there. It's just where else are they going to take this thing? How else are they going to recover from this without sort of doing something sort of out of left field and almost disingenuous and almost undermining, like, or is it going to be a Deus Ex Machina kind of thing? Like, you don't know, right? So
I definitely don't.
It's had a great run, and now I'm just like, what's going to happen next?
There's only 2 more books.
There you go. And so I don't know how they're going to wrap it up. Honestly, with just 2 books, I do not know how they're going to wrap it up.
That's why I have to.
And I hope they don't.
Then we can play predictions.
I just hope they don't Game of Thrones it, right? Where it's like, we're just gonna use the last 2 seasons to tie everything up. And I'm just like, all right. So there's that. And then there's, as you have seen, all of the airtime that this Keeper of the Lost Cities is getting on this channel.
It's gonna get way more because I'm also reading it. So
it's just I still can't get behind the ship. I can't get behind the main ship. Alexa has spoilery said she that was her ship, and I'm still gonna keep the spoilers on, because hey, if you want to see it, you read it. I will not knock it any further, because I get it. I do. I understand. I will be the first one to say, yes, this ship makes sense in context. Yes, I guess you are young. I don't know. Without, like, I understand being that age and sort of imprinting on certain things.
Imprinting.
That's a real thing. I think it's a real thing. It's like principle of first mention. It's like your heart is a blank slate, and the first thing that just right on that.
Oh, I'm not saying it's not a real thing. It's just funny because that actually makes sense.
Right, and then years later, as a grown-up, you look back and go, how in the world did I ever? So I don't know, but since this is sort of leaning towards the shoujo kind of trope, and I'm just like, and especially now that they're a little older, and a couple of years have, I think, gone by, I think, since the first book, or maybe it's been a year and a half, I don't know, and they've matured. Like, the fact that it's still there, and that is a great spoiler, and I'm just like, oh god, there's just and although on the flip side, the level of meta self-awareness about the ships in this book, Alexa, you have yet to get there. Kristen might be seeing. The level of meta self-awareness about the ships is insane. Everyone is shipping stuff hard and alluding to ships, and I am just living for that. I don't like the current ship that is sailing, but I am living for everybody else's ideas about it and opinions of it. So that's something to look forward to. And that is something that I've never seen before. Like, who ships in a meta way? Apparently Shannon Messenger, so 2 thumbs up for that. I enjoyed that. That was great. And I love these side characters more. I swear to God. If only just for that. If only because of the meta shipping that they do. That, like, I might as well be sitting on the couch with them going, oh yeah, totally. That happened right there. So, anyway.
Anyway, clearly Maki has a lot of feelings about Keeper of the Lost Cities that will remain undiscussed in specifics until I actually catch up. I'm looking forward to doing that. And that's the end of this What We Read video. If you have any comments on any of the books we talked about, we'd love to know. And we'd also love to hear what you guys have been reading. So we'll catch you guys with our next video. Bye!